Excellent. We're recording, everybody. Welcome to the first supplemental leadership session. Today's is hosted by Dr. Jason Hedrick of TTU. He's going to be talking to you about adaptive leadership. A little bit later on, we're going to go into breakout rooms. We'll have a total of 6 rooms, but just like we did before, one of those rooms will be the main room. When we get to that portion, Dr. Hedrick will ask me to go ahead and place the names for each room into the chat. So look for that, but we'll also help you. We'll make it so that you can manually go into those rooms. Otherwise, I'm going to mute myself, turn myself off camera, and turn it over to Dr. Hedrick.
Thanks so much. It's good to be with you all today. As he mentioned, my name is Jason Hedrick. I am an assistant professor here at Texas Tech in agricultural leadership and community development. And so let me just say that I'm very humbled to be here with you today and talk to you about adaptive leadership, about the process of change, and hopefully add some tools to your toolbox of leadership. Today we're going to, we'll talk about the assessment that you were sent in advance. I hope that you find the notes page helpful today as you're able to hopefully take notes that are applicable to you based on our conversation. We'll do some question and answer, and then we're also, as he mentioned, going to do some breakout rooms later on where we can process and talk about some of the things that we discussed today with adaptive leadership. Let's get into it. What we're going to do first, we're going to get into what exactly is adaptive leadership. We're going to go over the steps and behaviors today, talk about that, but I wanted just to kind of do an introduction into adaptive leadership. Adaptive leadership was initially proposed by Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky. They are both professors at Harvard University in the Kennedy School. And so Dr. Heifetz worked for consulting and helped out with 2 US presidents. And that really helped him to see adaptive leadership as it was and as it is. And so that's a little background into who is the originators of the idea of adaptive leadership. Now, adaptive leadership is a model that leaders use to encourage people to adapt or to change. And we're going to talk about change in a few minutes. But it helps individuals to deal with problems, challenges, and other changes that might be going on either in their communities, in their organizations, or even on a much larger scale. So adaptive leadership aims to mobilize, motivate, organize, orient, and focus the attention of others. This statement is very broad, meaning that adaptive leadership has a lot of capabilities behind it. If we look at all of those verbs, all of those things, mobilizing people, getting people to move, motivating others, helping to encourage them, support them. This sounds like a very powerful leadership tool, and it can be. But also it's important to discuss and to mention that adaptive leadership doesn't always work for every situation. And so when we're thinking about adaptive leadership and we're thinking about using this to solve challenges and to do some of those things, I think it's important to really know that it can be a very powerful tool, but it's not always the best tool to use if you're looking to solve problems. And so all problems. I think adaptive leadership can be used to really look at a lot of challenges, issues, problems that you may be having with an organization, with the community, like I said, those sort of things. And there are also some connections to social justice. I know in reading over your biographies, some of you are involved in social justice, some of you are involved in community development, some of you are involved in the business sector, law, medicine, the list goes on. Again, I'm very humbled to be with you today. So I think one of the first things that I want to do as well is just to kind of go over some of the things that I have done with adaptive leadership. I have done research using adaptive leadership to see how college students here in the United States, how they view adaptive leadership from after they learn about it, how they use it, how it's helpful and beneficial. I and some colleagues have written an article for college administrators, for university administrators, to see how they could use adaptive leadership to solve challenges on campus, such as free speech issues, addressing the pandemic. That was a suggestion that we made before we even knew that COVID-19 was going to have such a big impact here in the world. And I've also used adaptive leadership research to show how our values, or our organizational or community values, what our communities might hold to be important, how that's transferred to from leader to follower along the adaptive leadership process. I've taught adaptive leadership in some of my courses that I teach here at the university. In particular, I taught an international leadership course this year, and we used adaptive leadership to look at and examine the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And my students, as part of their final project, had to use adaptive leadership to see how they might solve some of the challenges and some of the goals expressed through the Sustainable Development Goals, through an agriculture lens. Because I do teach in a college of agriculture here at Texas Tech, we use that to be an opportunity and a way to merge agriculture and some of these larger world challenges and world issues. And what I thought about their projects, it was really great to see them be creative in that space. And it was great to see some of the creative solutions that they brought to the table. Last, I've also consulted with businesses around adaptive leadership to help them address some of the challenges and some of the work that they're doing. So at the bottom of the slide, you see the word change. And I just, I want to ask, how do you respond to change? Do you like change? Do you not like change? You can either put your answers in the chat, or if one or two of you want to share, how do you process change? What do you think about change?
Well, change is not always good.
Okay.
It takes time for one to adapt to a different perspective. Well, maybe because most of the time we're used to the old ways of doing things. So getting to do things in a new way or having to adapt to new situations is very difficult. But you have to have an open mind and try to adapt so that the change doesn't conflict with your emotions or within you, and probably you end up having stress to deal with a change that is happening.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I think that sometimes with change, we as humans get very deeply rooted in traditions, and some of those can be cultural traditions, some of those can be workplace, organization, community traditions, and we find those to be valuable, and we value those. And so when we start talking about changing, we sometimes we use the expression in my family that we rock the boat, meaning that we're not smooth sailing, that we're really, that we're taking on troubled waters and taking on some hard challenges. And I think that time is of essence. Adaptive leadership is not something that you can start this afternoon and all of your problems will be solved tomorrow. That's not what adaptive leadership is. And so I appreciate that you mentioned time, because time is important and time is critical when we are thinking about challenges and really going through all the steps of adaptive leadership. So thanks for sharing that. Does anyone else want to share about change? I think several of you maybe have posted in the chat about that.
Now, I told Dr. Hedrick that you were not shy, so don't make me look bad, guys.
Hello? Hello,
Yes.
everyone? Yes. I had actually posted in the chat, but for me, I tend to get bored when one is stuck in a same routine for an extended period of time. And so the challenge of change excites me and it keeps me motivated. So that's why for me, I think adaptive leadership, I don't find it to be too much of a challenge. In actual fact, being stuck in the same routine and going through the motions day by day is actually what gives me a challenge to get through, because it tends to affect my overall motivation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I am with you. I like change. I appreciate tradition when tradition is valuable and working, but sometimes we need to change policies, change systems to be more equitable and fair to others, or we need to address change in the workplace so that the work and task can be done more efficiently. And so that's what I like about adaptive leadership. But so we've really heard kind of two schools of adaptive leadership and change, really. Some people really love change. It motivates them. They like the creativity and to be able to express new ideas and to make those happen. Others are more resistant to change. And so when we think about change, adaptive leadership is really was founded on the idea that complex social systems are very difficult to navigate and to maneuver. And so when we think about this, we all process change differently. We all process adaptation differently. Some things that I think you need to consider when we're discussing adaptive leadership is that species must find a way to adapt. We see this with animals. Animals will adapt to given situations and challenges that they meet in the wild. And so if we think about that, we know that as humans, we have the capacity to reflect on our problems. And no doubt many of you in this group find yourself thinking about challenges, issues, or problems that you face, or that your workplace or government or communities face. And so sometimes we have to change our response. And I think that for me, over the past 18 months, if we think about COVID and we think about the worldwide impacts of COVID, we might think about the use of masks. And so if we're thinking about the use of masks, that was an adaptation and a change that became mandated in a lot of places, but it also was not something, it wasn't a tradition that that all nations and all parts of the world we're used to. And so I think when we think about that, we see that we can change our response. We all have vision. Again, part of your participation in this program is because of the vision that you have to make a difference or to make a change in the world. And so if we think about this, it takes that vision, seeing ahead into the future of what could be for new opportunities and to solve some of these problems. We must learn to adapt. That's the other thing. You know, I think that there's always a place for traditional ways of doing things, but we have to learn to adapt in one way or another. Sometimes when we process change, and this is one of, I think, the most difficult parts, is that we have to challenge sometimes the beliefs, identities, and values of others and ourselves. Sometimes as the leader in a situation, we have to challenge some of these things that we're comfortable with. Part of adaptive leadership is kind of expanding your comfort zone to see the views of others and to see how we can work more collectively on a given problem or challenge. So I want to present to you the model of adaptive leadership. This model of adaptive leadership is taken from Northhouse textbook, which is a book that I use to teach here at the university. And as you can see, this model, there are 3 different categories. There's your challenges section, and I'll get into challenges in a minute. There's the leader behaviors. We're going to spend some time talking about the behaviors that you can do in order to be effective with this. And then there's the adaptive work. So the actual work that's being done to address the challenge. And so I just wanted to provide this as a way to show you that there is a broad picture, and you can look at this as a very broad model to see all of the steps involved. Now, the first one is going to be this challenges section. And so if we think about challenges, there are 3 types of challenges that you will encounter. And part of adaptive leadership is deciding what type of challenge am I or this group or community organization, whatever that you're working with, what are you trying to solve? And so I want to talk about these briefly, these 3 types of challenges or problems. The first one is technical. Now, a technical problem or technical challenge, often when I talk about this in my classroom, my students will think that it has to do with technology or computers. And those are the examples that they give. And while those might be the type of challenges that you're looking at, technical challenges, this is where a problem definition is very clear. The leader or an expert close to the leader can provide the solution by themselves. It's also the easiest to resolve. If you know that you're using, a computer and the computer battery, you forgot to plug your computer in and charge the battery, and the computer dies, then you know that you don't need to call someone, you just need to plug the computer back up. That's an example of a technical challenge. That's something that you can do alone and you can solve alone. And so I call this the I. Type 1 is I can solve this challenge. I can solve this issue. When we get into type 2, this is where it begins to get more complex. And so for this one, this is a technical and adaptive challenge. The problem definition is clear. We know what the problem is. The solution might require new learning, either on my behalf or with the other people that I'm working with. So learning is part of this challenge. Both leader, you as the leader, and the follower, so the group that you're working with, the followers are responsible for the solution. So I call this a we problem because it involves myself as the leader and other people that I'm working with. So we collectively can solve that challenge or solve that issue. Now, the last one is the most difficult. That's the adaptive challenge. This is where change comes in. Adaptive, to adapt means to change. And so if we think about that, the problem, definition, solution, and the implementation requires new learning. So there is broad learning that must occur in order for adaptive challenges to be faced. Sometimes we don't know what the problem is. We know that workplace productivity is down, but we don't know why. We don't know why people aren't getting their work done. And so that would be an example of an adaptive challenge. We understand that that there is a problem, but we have to get to the root of what that problem is. The responsibility for the solution comes from the follower, so the people that you're working with. Last, it's the most difficult to resolve because it takes the most people and the most energy in order to come up with a creative solution for that challenge. I call this a they challenge. So again, technical is I can fix. We, the type 2, is technical and adaptive, meaning that the leader and the follower can work on the solution together. The adaptive challenge, that type 3, that is solved by your followers. You can oversee it, but the people that you're working with are going to be the best solution to that challenge. Any questions about the 3 types of challenges?
Would it be right if I say issues like, say, human trafficking would fall under adaptive maybe challenge, because we would have to go like deep into the root to find out what's the problem, why are we having human trafficking? And I want to make examples that would, because I want to be clear on this whole thing. And yes, maybe the technical and adaptive would be something like, if there's a new product on the market and maybe I want to work with people to understand or buy the product, and that other one would be me maybe having to deal with my kids at home. That's I. Am I right in making those examples?
Yes, yes. I think that you bring up a really great point. Technical and adaptive, I think a good way to look at technical and adaptive is a community is going to have a celebration for the community. The leader can take that on, but they also need the community to be involved. So that's a we problem, or we challenge. As you get more into adaptive, I think you bring up that's an example that would be an adaptive challenge, human trafficking, because there's so much knowledge that has to be learned on behalf of everyone to understand maybe all the causes, all the challenges, the different parts of that challenge, of that problem. It's adaptive. Most social issues that we encounter, human trafficking, human rights, those sort of things, those are going to be your more adaptive challenges. So yes, you're absolutely correct. Does that help clarify that?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for mentioning that. as I mentioned, adaptive challenges sometimes are going to be those social justice issues. So,
I'm sorry, one more question.
yes.
Is there a situation where you can have an absolute technical challenge and an absolute adaptive challenge? Because I'm assuming this means it's simply a me problem, and then the last one is simply a they problem. Is that possible?
It is possible. I think in terms, because, well, let's be honest about challenges and issues. Usually a challenge isn't always solved as easily as plugging in your laptop to charge it. So when we think about these challenges, we can think about them in terms of what is my expertise, my knowledge, my capacity. Those are the technical challenges. When we look at adaptive challenges, I may have some insight, but I know that others have the larger capacity to solve those challenges.
Very clear. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. These are great insights. So just because sometimes it can be a little difficult to really consider and think about these challenges, I've offered these two kind of further breakdowns. Now, in the interest of time, I'll give this to you. Like I said, it's just some further help. Most of the time, technical challenges have quick and easy solutions. These are things that we as the leader, we as the project manager can take on, and we can help provide solutions. It requires small changes that are within the organizational boundaries. You don't have to have new policy that's written or new laws put into effect. These are small changes. People are very receptive to technical solutions. Why? Because they're easy. We like the easy solutions. Solutions can be implemented fast and also by authority. Now, when we consider adaptive challenges, again, this is where change comes in. It's sometimes difficult to identify the root of the challenge, especially on some of these larger, broader social issues. In human trafficking, that was a good example, so I'm going to use that. If we think about human trafficking, it's difficult to identify the root of that challenge or the root of that problem. It requires change in the way that things are done. So again, it can bring up new policies, new documents, those sort of things. People who are working from where the problem is generated might be able to solve it. And so we'll get into some of that with adaptive leadership and some of the behaviors. It requires change at a lot of places that might cross the boundaries of community, of government, of business, economic, social. So a lot of these challenges that are going to be adaptive, especially on, I think, those social justice issues, such as human trafficking, they're going to require a lot of places that cross boundaries. People resist adaptive challenges because they're hard. Remember that technical challenges are easy, so people are okay with those. But when it's hard work, that's when you have an adaptive challenge. And adaptive challenges, people resist those because it might rock the system. It might come in direct conflict with their values, with things that they hold traditional. Solutions emerge from experimentation and discovery, and sometimes they can take a long time. So that I mentioned earlier that adaptive leadership is a great tool, but it's not one typically that you're going to get fast results. It will take some time. But I think that when you use the behaviors that are associated with it, when we go over and talk about those, I think that you'll see that there are some things to do and things to consider. Now, why are people, we talked about this a little bit, what are the common responses to adaptive challenges? People hold on to those past assumptions, past experiences. A lot of times people like to blame authority for different challenges and issues. They externalize the enemy. So they blame the problems on someone else, another group, another organization, when in fact, it may be something that's going on within your organization related to policies, related to laws, those sort of things, those traditions that we talked about earlier. Sometimes people just deny the problems. And when you deny the problems, they tend to get worse over time. And lastly, they may find a distracting issue. I don't know how many of you have pets, but if you have a pet or any animal, they may be very interested in one thing and can quickly lose that attention to focus on something else. And so that's what I call a distracting issue. And so when we think about distracting issues, as we're doing the work of adaptive leadership, you may stumble upon other issues and other challenges. Sometimes groups will stop the work that they're doing on the issue at hand and decide to focus in another area because it's easier. So that's that distracting issue. So these are the leader behaviors for the state. Yes.
I was actually coming to that point of finding a distracting issue. With regards to human trafficking, you would find that you would have an underlying problem or an issue like forced labor. So while you're trying to deal with human trafficking, now here's an issue of forced labor. So now you have to deal with human trafficking and forced labor and probably child labor and other things related to that.
So you bring up a really great point. Sometimes when we have those, we find those other parts or other challenges that need addressed. Research shows that it's best to continue focusing on your main problem. You may need to create a different group or have others working on solutions for forced labor. And I know that sometimes it can seem like once you start into something that you continue to find different problems. And those problems all build on each other, and it can be very overwhelming to you as the leader or overwhelming to the group. Part of adaptive leadership is helping to address some of those, some of the ways that as the leader, how you can help navigate individuals and the projects that you're working on. So yes, I think you bring up a good point that when we have one challenge, we may find 2 or 3 others that are associated with it. But if you stick to your main work for that group and maybe you assign a different group, that's how you can kind of maneuver and continue the work. Because sometimes it's easy to say, we can't go any further, we have to solve this before we solve this. And again, with a social justice issue, that may be the case that there's a lot of components and challenges to that one problem. But I think that you have to be willing to continue the work and the path you're on before you maybe stop and divert your attention to a different challenge. Does that make sense?
It does. It sure does. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That was a great insight. So here are the leader behaviors, and these behaviors are steps. This is by no means the way that things have to be done, but they are steps for you to consider as you are addressing these challenges. And so the first one is get on the balcony. And this is where I think of this as just taking a bird's eye view of seeing the world in a broader scope. And so when we think about this, if you've ever stood on a balcony and you look down, you can see things from a different perspective than if you were on the street. You're looking down and you can see, like I said, the broad views. So when we say get on the balcony, it helps step away from the conflict. Sometimes we have to take ourselves out of the challenge as leaders and think more broadly about some of these things. You don't disassociate, you're just taking a step back to maybe view the behaviors of others that you're working with, of communities, of taking maybe a different perspective or a different view. You're looking at the big picture, you're seeking more information for a full understanding. Sometimes as the leader, you may have to have conversations with people in your organization, in your communities, to find out maybe what are some of the root problems or causes of these problems. We can also seek insight from others again and get those different views. And so get on the balcony. I always say, just take a step back and look at it from a different perspective. Get on the balcony, even though it's the first behavior, the first step. As I use adaptive leadership in my work, I find that I am taking the step back even as I get to some of the later steps, that I have to go back to the balcony and I have to take a different look. And so getting on the balcony, I think, is a very powerful tool of self-reflection and just gaining that perspective from others. The next thing is to identify the adaptive challenge. After you've taken that big picture, broader look, this is where you're able to pinpoint the problems that you are going to address. This, you have to decide, is this technical? Is this something that I can take on as the leader? Is this something that as the leader and the other people I'm working with, can we take this on? So it's technical and adaptive, or is it an adaptive challenge? And again, that's where you go back and ask some of those questions and think about some of those things. So when you're on the balcony, you know some of the things that you should be thinking about. You also want to make sure that you hear that you're ensuring that the correct problem is diagnosed. And you also want to assess relationships and problem B. So some of the things that you mentioned, if we're looking at human trafficking and forced labor issues and challenges come up, that would be a problem B. And as the leader, you may have the vision and the foresight to know that that's coming. And so in terms of that, I think that it's an opportunity for you to identify the challenge, but also be thinking ahead to some of the challenges that may come up, and even address these with the group that you are working with. I think the next one is regulate distress. And sometimes this one can be the most difficult, because as you're regulating distress, what this means is that you're helping others to become aware of the need for change or the need to solve a problem. Changing people's minds is one of the hardest things that we do or can do. But we do have the capacity when, as leaders, we've taken the time to reflect and taken the time to see the bigger picture. We can help tell the story of the problem and challenge, and that will get more people on board. Help others to not feel overwhelmed by the thought of change. Again, this takes time, and this can be difficult. Regulating distress also means that you monitor the stress others are experiencing. If you have someone on your team who is looking at this challenge and they have a lot of stress and a lot of things going on in their life, then helping to monitor them and know that maybe telling them to support them to say, you need to take a step back. Don't take on all of this. One person can't do this alone. I also teach a team development course here at Texas Tech. And one of the things I see happen in the classroom is that one person will try to do the work of everyone else because they don't have trust with their group, or they don't have, they think things need to be done a certain way. And when you're working in a team environment or with teams and groups, you have to be willing to let everyone participate. And so sometimes we have to monitor the stress, including our own stress. Know that if you're the project leader, that it's okay to take a break. It's okay to say, I can't be at that meeting, but I trust that you all will be able to handle the discussion today. Because sometimes we just have too much going on. If we become too invested in one challenge or one thing, we may get burnt out. Someone earlier talked about getting burnt out if they don't get to do changes along the way. And so it can be just kind of the exact opposite. When we're focusing on one thing, people tend to get burnt out. Any questions about those first 3 behaviors?
Jason, we've got about 18 minutes left.
Okay, I'm trying to get through because I want to do some of the discussion.
You're fine. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Yeah. So the behaviors, let's get back into those. So maintaining disciplined attention. This is where we help because we've gotten on the balcony, we've taken a look at the challenge or issue, we've gotten the opportunity to provide focus for the issue itself. This is also where we mobilize and encourage people to drop their defenses. Sometimes you may have people working on the project who don't want to see the change happen. And we have to help them see that this is for the greater good of our organization, the greater good of our community, even our country. And so if we're doing that, we have to help them drop their defenses and come up with ways that they can move forward while still making sure that their voice is heard. Mobilizing others to openly confront their problems. Sometimes when we're doing this can be very challenging. And I find that when I'm being challenged about something that I'm doing, that I need to reflect on that, and I need to think about that in a different light. And so I will actually get out a pen and paper and I journal. I just get all my thoughts out there because that helps me process what I'm experiencing and also what others are experiencing. The last one here is do not allow others to blame others for mistakes. We all at some point in our life have said, well, I could get this done if this happened or if they did this. And I think that when we begin to blame others, we take the focus away. And we have to think, instead of blaming others, we have to think about how to include others and how to bring them into the solution. Because when we bring in others to make the decision and to help address the challenge, then we are truly getting a broader perspective, a broader view. Again, you may have to step back on the balcony, take a look at what's going on, and decide if you need to add individuals or what you might need to do. This is also where you support others. Supporting others is very helpful in the process, and it probably takes the most time from the leader because you're supporting sometimes a very large group, and just making sure that their needs are being met and that they continue to be motivated to do the work. It keeps everyone on task and focused. Again, probably the way that people get off task the most is because they're not motivated to continue to work and they're not motivated to keep going. Now, I think this next step is one of the most important parts of adaptive leadership. This is where it really puts limits on your own influence as the leader. You really have to trust those that you're working with in order to motivate them and to build trust, because when there's trust in a group, more work will be done. And when we're thinking about challenges, then things like this become very important. When you put limits on your influence and the work that you're doing, this is also where you will experience the growth of your team. Your team gets to develop and change in their own way of doing things, and that's a positive thing. Sometimes this also reflects the problem solving back to the people involved. If you're addressing a need in a community, don't just rely on what you see, but go and talk to those community members. Find out what challenges they have and how they think that they could be addressed and fixed. I think sometimes that is one of the most powerful things we can do, is to ask the opinion of others. And we're going to get into that in a minute, why that's so important. I think also you just have to give up power sometimes for the decision-making process. People will look to you because you're the leader, but you have to be willing to step back and say, what does the group think? What is the group consensus? How can we move forward from your recommendations? And so putting that power back to them, I think, is very important. The last one is protecting leadership voices from below. As we begin to work on some of these challenges and issues in communities and businesses, you may have individuals who are not at the table, who are not in the meetings where some of these decisions are being made. So you have to be willing as the leader to step up and voice some of the things you might hear from these individuals. Listen to the people who feel marginalized, who feels like they don't have a seat at the table. Listen to those who feel their opinions are being judged. You may have someone who at the very beginning of your project and the work is very vocal, and they are giving great insight and being very creative in some of the things they're talking about. And someone who's on the traditional side may say, that idea will never work, you're too young, you don't have enough experience. And so it can really bring that individual down. Make sure that you're having conversations with all group members to see if their voice is being heard and if they're being able to contribute to the challenge. Give voice to those individuals who don't have that voice, and ensure that that all opinions matter, especially with change. All opinions matter, because you want a solution to come from your challenge that others can use. And so if we're thinking about this, I think a good way after you're having those conversations is to come back and say, I've heard from others not here in this room or not associated with the project that this is a concern. By telling the group that, you're standing up for those who don't have a voice. And sometimes those are the voices that need to be heard the most. So again, those are the steps of adaptive leadership. Now we're going to do a quick activity. Michael, how much time do we have left?
You got about 10 minutes.
Okay. Let me go through two things, and then we'll just open it up to discussion. When we look at adaptive leadership, it gives us the opportunity to take that big picture view, and it allows those others to be involved in the process, and it helps to make sure that the work addresses the challenge that you have identified as the leader. It ensures that all opinions matter, and it helps to know that adaptive leadership may not work in all challenges, but it's a great way to really guide the difficult and hard work that many of us take on in order to solve problems. So these are steps and kind of behaviors, and it's a guideline. It doesn't mean that that's the exact way it has to be done. As I mentioned, you're going to have to step back and get on the balcony a lot during the adaptive process. So at this time, I'm just going to open it up to questions, comments. I do want to talk about the assessment just briefly, but I just want to see what kind of questions or comments you have about adaptive leadership.
So if you have your hand raised or you want to speak, just go ahead and unmute and talk. Just jump right in. Or I'll start calling on some of you who've been making some great comments.
I'm excited to read the comments afterwards. Let me ask another question. If you don't have questions about adaptive leadership, what are some ways that you can see using adaptive leadership in the work that you're responsible for?
But maybe I can start, Doc. Having gone through also the exercise, I'm Felix, by the way, from Malawi, Felix Charuga. Having gone through the exercise, I realized that basically when I was looking at the weakness, the results, and it showed me that I'm weak and require to do improvement on other areas, and so because of this adaptive, I have learned two things. One is that as a leader, you tend to give hope, because there are certain things that are extremely difficult for people to change, because they plant anxiety in the people on what is going to happen next to us. So, but by being an adaptive leader, I'm using we because it's a collective thing. We tend to instill hope in the people we are leading, or the community, that no, let's change, so that tomorrow is going to be a better day. I will cite an example of what we did in our village when we had influenced that we needed a preschool. Most of the parents were not sending their kids to the preschool. We started with only 25 pupils. But as with sensitization, we said, no, bring them, so that they get to be at a preschool before they start primary school. Over the time, the school grew, and the parents understood that the importance of sending their children to preschool. But now it's a culture that they are fighting for a place for their children to be at the preschool. But initially they had anxiety. Because these are small children. It was a culture that was not there before. But this time around, they know that this is a good thing. So I've learned that it gives hope to the people that tomorrow is going to be a better day. Maybe I should stop there for a moment.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that's a great real world example of helping others to see that change is good. Now, that brings up another challenge, of course. Maybe the preschool isn't big enough for all the people who want to bring their children. But that's a good problem to have instead of maybe a negative problem to have. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that adaptive leadership, I love that idea of hope, because it is a process that involves others and really gives an opportunity for us to hear other voices. It is hopeful for many. And so I do appreciate that word of hope.
Dolly, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead and unmute and jump on in.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Mr. Jason, your talk was so insightful and motivating because as I keep working on my focus project, it's very nerve-wracking kind of to work with people and rely on people a lot, especially when you're doing things like mentorship programs that require people to change their day-to-day activities, kind of change their schedules to accommodate, maybe let's say mentoring some mentees. So like the discussion on regulating the stress and basically, reminding people of the end goal and, trying to always reassure them that it's for the greater good. It was so motivating to hear because as a leader, you need to be able to know that you can actually do it. And there are ways you can do it to help your team like deliver. So thank you so much.
Thank you for those comments. And I think you're exactly right. I think that when we're working with others, trust has to be part of that. And sometimes when you're regulating the distress of others and you're helping them to see that it's for the greater good, I myself need that reminder also that this work that I'm taking on is not easy, but it's for the greater good. And I think that I appreciate those comments and related to that, and I'll say this at the end again, and I'll share my contact information, but as you're working on your projects, if you want to use adaptive leadership or have questions further about it, and you want to have a discussion, I'm more than happy to schedule some Zoom time with you or to do an email or whatever would work for you there, just to be a resource for you.
Now, Afinse, I saw you had your hand up, but I see you've lowered it.
Okay, I can have a bite.
Please.
Hello everyone. Just in relation to adaptive leadership, I've just been wondering, is it something that is, how much does a person's personality and character have to do with it, and which extent is this something that is actually teachable and transferable to those that one would be working in the same group with? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. Research has told us that someone's personality, their personality traits and characteristics make up about 24%, that's very specific, but 24% of who they are as a leader, which means 76% of leadership is learning from our own experiences and the work that we're doing. And so while our personality and characteristics do come into play there, I think that what I like about adaptive leadership is that it offers us a way of looking at challenges and issues with kind of a more focused lens. I think about when I took this assessment the first time I took this, I was a PhD student and I scored very low on some categories. The more I have used this, I just took this last week again to see where I was, and all of my scores were greatly improved, either high or that mid-high range. And so when I think about that, over time, we develop more skills and we develop the capacity to do some of the work that we may not have always been comfortable doing. And so I think you bring up a good point in that adaptive leadership can help us develop in areas that we need to, but also maybe make ourselves better through the work to be able to highlight our strengths. I know that several of you have taken, if not all of you have taken the Strength Finder assessment. And so for me, adaptability is one of my strengths. So I'm open to change and I like to help people process change. And I think that is something that, again, is a skill that you learn over time. So I appreciate your thoughts there and hope that I answered that question.
We are just about out of time. I see that Zara Carato has had her hand up for a while, and I know you also wanted to take a few minutes to talk about, or just, a little bit to talk about the assessment. So I'm going to say this is the end of the obligatory part. If you need to log off, you are welcome to do so. Zara, I'd love to hear your thoughts and responses. And then after that, Jason, if you wanted to talk briefly about the assessment,
Yeah.
go right ahead.
Okay, hi everyone. I am Zara from Nigeria. So the section that actually stood out for me is the slide on protect leadership voices from below. Basically, this is what I do professionally, protection mainstreaming, including like ensuring inclusion in program activities. And this is something that people usually take for granted. Even for my focus project toolkit, yesterday I was doing a review to reshare with my project supervisor, Yan. And then I decided to get a feedback from few people. Then people were asking, why am I adding protection into it? I'm talking about climate change. Why am I bringing into why am I bringing disability, gender inclusion, children inclusion, child voices, and all that into the programming? It's actually something that we take, we actually take for granted, but it actually goes a long way, especially as a leader. We need to know that we are representing all groups, not just people like us. So this actually stood out for me, and I feel I am motivated to go back and then still review my project focus toolkit and increase more component of protection mainstreaming. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you for sharing that. That's great. And I think you're right. Protecting those leadership voices from below is something that often we take for granted, and we don't take the time to invest in people. Sometimes we invest in other things, but we forget that people are a big component of change and of the changes that we're making. And so not everyone is willing to come forward and tell you that they're not being heard or that they have concerns. Sometimes it takes you as a leader getting back up on the balcony and inviting people up with you to see the broader picture, to get their perspectives. Thank you for the work that you do. That's great work. And I know that it can be difficult. So thanks for sharing that.
All right, do you want to jump into the assessment just briefly?
Yes, yeah. So in terms of the assessment, and I appreciate those of you who are able to take that. And I think that when we're thinking about the assessment, assessments are great ways to tell us that we may have good skills in one area and that we need improvements in the other. But what I tell my students, and I will share with you, is assessments are only ways of evaluating and looking at ourselves. It doesn't mean that we can't change ourselves and that we don't have skills in these areas. Because as I indicated, as I've taken this assessment several times, each time I improve in areas that I had lower scores in. So as we do this work, you have the capacity to build those skills. So I guess, again, in terms of like every one of the different steps, hopefully you were able to see your scores. And again, getting on the balcony, that's how you're able to step back and see the complexities and the dimensions of a situation. So you have big picture thinking, maybe you're a visionary, those sort of things. Identifying the adaptive challenges. This is just how you recognize challenges and problems and do not respond to these with only technical leadership. You're willing to give up some of the responsibility. And I think that that's very important. Regulate distress. This is how we provide a safe space for others where they can tackle these difficult problems, where they can address them, and also how confident and calm you are in conflict. We could do 2 other sessions on conflict and conflict management and how we work with others. I'm writing a book chapter right now on conflict and how we deal with conflict. So I know that it's very, that can be a difficult process in itself. Maintain discipline and attention. This is how you get others to face challenges and not let them avoid the difficult problems. This is that support area. So how supportive are you of those around you? Giving the work back to the people, that's how you empower others. to think for themselves, and to solve the problems at hand. And last, to protect leadership voices from below. This is how open and accepting you are of the quiet voices, of the unusual and sometimes even radical contributions. Often these can be the most creative solutions that you hear from group members who might have lower status on the work that you're doing. So again, if anyone wants to discuss that assessment, I think my email address is on the screen. So I welcome you to send me an email. I also welcome, I'm on Twitter. So if you want to engage on Twitter or anything like that, I'm open to that. I'll stick around if anyone has questions, but again, I really appreciate being with this group today and the opportunity to talk to you about how we process change and how we can adapt, and wish you the best of luck in your future projects.
Wonderful. Before I hit stop on the recording, a couple of people were asking about the book. Could you go ahead and let us know what it is real quick on the recording so they can find it later if they want?
Yes. Well, there's a couple books, I think, and I don't know which one in particular you're talking about. One of them is there are some books on the resources notes page at the bottom. They wrote one of those books is the Heifetz book that was kind of the originating book behind adaptive leadership. I think the book that I discussed during, let me grab it and I can just show you. One of the books that I talked about was Leadership by Peter Northouse. He is a renowned professor of leadership, and that book is really good, not just for adaptive leadership, but learning about and reading about all types of leadership styles and behaviors, from trait to skill development, all kinds of things that may be useful for you as leaders.
Okay, I think I've got my camera back on. I hope everybody had a wonderful time, seeing wonderful comments. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.